welcome to We Are Already Free, a podcast for anyone ready to reclaim their sovereignty and live beautiful lives right now, rather than waiting for some outside power to rescue them. This podcast is about living an abundant life of authenticity. On this episode, have you ever struggled with speaking your truth? Even though you knew that things weren't quite right, have you stayed quiet in the hopes that it would just get better? Well, good news. That's one of the many empowering things I chat about on this week's episode with Pete Evans, where you'll learn how Pete has navigated being cancelled as one of the top-selling authors and most popular celebrities in Australia, all for continuing to speak the truth he's been speaking for much of his life. One of the most beautiful things about this conversation with Pete is just how humble he is, how he really doesn't care about celebrity for its own sake. He tells us beautiful story, like after halfway towards the end, about his experience of being a really popular celebrity and then continuing to speak his truth and being cancelled, and how that's changed how people approach him. And in fact, how it's improved how people approach him on the street when they see him and recognize him. I don't want to give too much away, but it is so beautiful. It just had me, like my heart just exploded open listening to him tell that story. This is a really new podcast. At the time of this release, it's only the third episode out. So if you feel like this kind of information, the reminder that we are already free, is something that more people should have access to, then please be sure to both review and subscribe to this podcast wherever you most listen. Probably the most valuable place, just from a perspective of helping it to get out there, would be Apple Podcasts. Because if enough people review and subscribe, then we could get up to the new and noteworthy section in Apple Podcasts, could be seen by thousands and thousands of people all over the world. And my hope and my belief is that there are many, many, many more people just like us who believe in sovereignty, who believe that we are already free, but they just feel alone and they don't know that there are more people, and they are just, the only access they have is to mainstream media and the fear-mongering of it all. So that's my only request. Please enjoy this uninterrupted episode. Hope you have an amazing time listening to the wonderful Pete Evans. Thanks, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello to Pete Evans. Welcome, my friend. How are you today?
Nathan, I'm not doing too bad. Thank you for having me. What do I mean by not doing too bad? I actually got got sick yesterday, which is really interesting, and had it now for just over 24 hours. So I'm not functioning at 100% my best. So here I am, and I'm ready, willing, and able.
When I get sick, it feels like the end of the world for me. I'm like, this is the worst thing ever. How are you feeling?
Well, it's interesting. I hadn't been sick for so long, and it's the second time in the last year, and both very similar episodes. Just came on all of a sudden, and then of the nighttime had big nighttime sweats, a lot of body liquid coming out of me through the pores, and then muscular aches, and then last time it went away pretty quickly, I think 2 or 3 days, and this time feels like it's passing through me a lot quicker. But yeah, it's so unusual for me, and I used to think that I was bulletproof, and it's very humbling when you do experience something like this, because you get to really appreciate what it feels like to be full of vitality and not feel like this. And I have been blessed over the last sort of couple of decades, that 3 decades, I would say, I've never had to see a doctor. I'm on no medications of such, pharmaceuticals. And these 2 times in the last year or 2 is the only time I can remember being sick for at least over probably 2 decades. So it's a journey at the moment for me, because I'm surrendering to it. I'm just accepting. I'm letting go. I'm not trying to analyze it too much. But it's such an interesting experience to feel that vitality wane in such a rapid rapid expression of itself. But then at the same time, when I went through this last time, the reemergence of that vitality was so beautiful. It was like, oh, here we go. And interestingly enough, I've looked at myself in the, sorry, I'm wiping my nose. I got a bit of snot. Funnily enough, my eyes are so clear over the last 24 hours while I've been going through this. So there's something in that as well. It's like, wow, the body is knowing what to do. It's expelling whatever it needs to expel through the pores or through the mucus, and just to trust in that. And I haven't put anything in to suppress that. I haven't really done anything to make it quicker, so to speak, as far as purging. Although I did have an infrared sauna last night,
Nice.
which felt really good, and had a little bit of ozone therapy, which I haven't had for a while, and jumped in the hyperbaric oxygen chamber yesterday. So maybe that's why it's such a quick turnaround. But yeah, it's for anyone else out there that's feeling sick, I feel for you, and we get through this.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, because I really relate to the sweats, man. Like, I was sick a few months ago now, and I actually couldn't believe how much I sweated. And any time, and it took a few days as well. Like you said, 4 days for the last one. That was kind of like that for me. And I think it's just a beautiful thing to have done whatever work necessary to realize that our bodies know how to move through dis-ease or to move through challenging. I always think of it as like an immune system upgrade. It's like my DNA is, it's like something's trying to upgrade and I just need to go through this thing. But man, I sweated myself. Like, I was changing clothes and sheets. It was intense. So it actually brings up a question for me, which I would be curious to hear. Is like, you say for the last few decades. So what was there a moment in your life where you kind of realized, if I keep listening to what I'm told by the medical system, by the pharmaceuticals, by those kind of greater systems that we are born into in this society, I'm going in a direction that I don't want to go in? And I'd be curious to hear what that turning point was for you and how that looked.
Yeah, I never really had such a reliance on the medical institutions. I was quite blessed that I have never been diagnosed with pretty much anything. When I was born, I had respiratory issues. So from the moment of birth, pretty much they put me in a humidity crib away from my parents. So I didn't have that touch, I think, for a couple of days from my mum. So that was sort of the initiation, so to speak, into this world, which was an interesting journey to come into, to be born and then not really have human touch for a couple of days and be separated, so to speak, and put into a strange chamber. And I haven't really thought too much about it over the past 5 decades, but I'm sure that sort of set up something for me in which to for which to remember, so to speak. But no, as I said, I've been pretty blessed with great health throughout most of my life. I mean, similar to most modern day kids, I did suffer from tonsillitis and getting sick quite a lot as a kid, but what I considered being sick was colds and flus, things like that, which subsequently led me on a path down the track, not so much to figure out why that was, but through exploration and finding new information, I found out that what I was eating through my formative years as a child, probably, I would say 100%, so maybe not probably, but through the research that I discovered, by eating the foods that Mum would give me, and I'm not blaming Mum, she only was doing what everybody else was doing, but let's just put it into context. I was eating cereal out of a box, rice bubbles or cornflakes, or with skim milk or milk on top of it. I was eating white bread toast for breakfast with Vegemite or honey or jam or something like that. And what I now know and what I've spoken about over the last decade, and and created documentaries and released cookbooks and other informative sources such as TV shows, I realized that those foods were probably causing, I shouldn't say probably, they were causing me to go through those bouts of illness. And I will just put the last week into context too. I've been under a little bit of stress over the last week. Plus, I did a trip to the snow to see my children, and I only had 2 days to see them. So to get there, I woke up at 2 a.m, which was disobeying my own natural rhythms. But because it was a 6-hour drive, I wanted to get there so I could ski with the kids on the first lift. So I woke up at 2, hopped in the car, drove for 6 hours, got to the snow at 8 a.m. so I could get first lifts with my kids. And I knew at the time, I was like, fuck, Pete, you're pushing it here. You're pushing your body. Usually you sleep till 5 or 6 in the morning and you have 8 or 9 hours of sleep. And that night, for instance, I had 3.5 or 4 hours of sleep. And similar on the way back as well. I shortened my sleep cycle, and probably change of temperatures and change of diet and a little bit of stress going on in my life. So things just sort of cascaded in the last week, where there was added stress, change of routine, healthy routine, I should say, which, lo and behold, when I got sick, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. It's not like a boogeyman came and got me. It's like, you're actually responsible for what happened to you because you tried to do too much, and you're paying the consequences now. So it's a valuable lesson, and we can probably look at all of these things that happen to us. And from the 400 or 500 interviews I've done with doctors and scientists and researchers around the world, they always say that your body will give you the warning signs of what is out of balance. So I just put my body out of balance, basically, or my soul or my emotional system out of balance, and I didn't have the tools at the time to rebalance them. Just through the choices that I made. So I know that's a long-winded explanation of things, but my whole life has been a journey of greater understanding of how our bodies work, and trying my best, and I know trying is a bit of a weasel word, but I am human and I still try and I still make mistakes, but trying to live as naturally as possible in harmony with nature as much as I can. And again, I just prove that, when you push yourself too hard and try to do too much, it's part of who I am. I'm quite a driven person, and one of my challenges in life is to do less, to not say yes as often to as many things that pop up, and just to take a little bit of a step backwards. And as I said, it's still a challenge that I'm working out, because part of me is, or a lot of me is, so driven to achieve and try to fill my day with as much as I can. But yeah, it's a work in progress, as we know,
Yeah,
I don't think we ever get to a point where we're like, fuck, I got it all sorted now. It's just going to be smooth. It's going to be smooth sailing for the rest of my life. I don't think it works like that. However, having that intention isn't a bad intention, I don't think. Like, how can I navigate these waters as smoothly as possible under my own steam and with the help and guidance of others and in a community? And yeah, it's a fascinating time, especially as we're seeing over the last couple of years too, in relation to all of that.
Well, I mean, everything you've just said is, for me, a reminder of what this whole podcast is. Well, the reason I'm doing this podcast is called We Are Already Free. And it's really just because I think that term is an antidote, is the opposite of what the current narrative of our society is saying, which is that we are not free, we are not powerful, and we should listen to these institutions that will give us all the answers, and we just surrender ourselves. Whereas everything you've just said is an acknowledgement of your sovereignty and of your power within the situation. It's like, okay, I'm sick, and I'm sick for very good reasons, because I take responsibility for that, and I acknowledge where I over pushed and where I do say yes too much, etc., etc. So it's like, I mean, if we were having this conversation, if I was having this conversation with someone who had bought into the stories we've been told, they would say, well, there's just some really nasty stuff out there. There's some nasty shit. And like, sometimes you just get it and it just happens. And then you just go and the doctor makes you better. And like, everything's fine because the doctor's the one who knows what health is about. And like, I mean, I don't think we'd be having that conversation if, that'd be a reason for us not to converse. But like, that's such a beautiful example to me, is hearing you speak that even in this position of, oh, I don't feel so well at the moment. It's not like I don't feel so well and it's all terrible and I don't know why. It's like, I don't feel so well and there are very good reasons for that. So I would love to hear just around that, around sovereignty and this idea that we are already free. Like, we spoke a while ago and you shared how, well, I'll put it in my own words and you can tell me how it resonates, but like how much you actually lost when you just stood up and carried on speaking your truth, as this whole current narrative around coronavirus and how this thing's so deadly and it's just going to kill you and there's nothing you can do and oh my God, it's terrible. And my understanding is you just carried on saying, hey, we got this. Like, we know how to navigate these kind of states and there's nothing else to be worried about. And what was that like for you? Or what was that experience of those decisions you needed to make around maintaining your sovereignty and your authenticity as those challenges arose where people were like, hey, you're not allowed to say those things. You're not allowed to tell people that stuff. Like, how did you navigate that in yourself?
Yeah, it was pretty simple, actually. It was very simple because there was no real question as to what I was, no, it sounds a bit wanky, but what I was meant to be doing. I would say that just following my instincts and following my intuition or my gut or my heart or my spirit was, there was never any doubt. I hope that makes sense. There was never any doubt that what I was saying should it or shouldn't be said. It was just like, well, this is coming through. It feels very authentic and very real. And, there were points where I was like, why are there other people that are speaking the same thing? It's surely people can see that the narrative that is being portrayed, there's too many holes in it. There's too many... there's very little truth in it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It doesn't make sense. And I would speak to people and they would say, yeah, it doesn't make any sense what you're saying. What they're saying makes no sense. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'm like, well, why isn't there more of this? And a lot of people would say, well, look what happened to you. You got cancelled, you got ridiculed, you got all your business partnerships were dissolved because they were threatened, basically, from the mainstream media and other places. I was like, yeah, I get that. I get why people wouldn't speak up for fear of losing what they've got. But when you look at the larger picture of what's going on in the world, we're going to lose a lot more than what you think we can individually lose here. If they lock me up or they silence me or whatever that is, so be it. But if you can see where this narrative or agenda is actually heading, I'm sure a lot of you would happily give up these small inconveniences at this particular point in time for greater inconveniences and loss of freedom down the track. Because if it gets to that point, reclaiming that will become a lot more difficult, I believe, than this short-term bit of pain that you may have to go through. It's very similar to basically the medical system, what I was talking about, ringing the alarm bells saying, hey, listen, something's not right. Something's out of balance. It could be your diet. It could be your emotional state, your relationships. It could be the career that you've chosen. It could be where you live. It could be how you live your life. Are you surrounded by EMFs? Are you surrounded by toxic people that take advantage of you? So our bodies give us this great barometer for our health, basically, where we can see. And it gives us basically a warning, an alarm to go, hey, if you don't amend this, if you don't work this shit out, it's going to get to a point down the track where you may not be able to reverse this. We'll take type 2 diabetes, for instance. We know that in 9 out of 10, maybe more cases, completely reversible, right? And basically it's due to diet. Now, our bodies give us the warning signs of that through the decades of us accumulating what is called type 2 diabetes through our lifestyle choices. Our bodies give us the warning signs saying, hey, listen, what you're doing isn't quite right. And then we get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and what do most people do? They go to their doctor and they put them on whatever pharmaceutical, whether it be insulin or whatever it may be. Instead of addressing the problem, they take a Band-Aid approach and then continue to live the same way that they've been living. Majority do. Until they get to the point where I've interviewed orthopedic surgeons that have to cut off people's feet or legs because they've continued to live the lifestyle that was warning them in the early stages. You might want to fix this. You might want to change this. So maybe it's not the best analogy, but let's just bring it back into the freedom and expression of sovereignty. It's the same thing. I'm like, if you don't speak up now, you might get to the point where when you do want to speak up or change something, it might not be possible. It may not be possible. And we're witnessing this in all different parts of the world. They're trying to pass different laws, whether it be in Germany, whether it's the United States, whether it be here in Australia or New Zealand, and maybe it's happening in Africa or South Africa, where they're wanting to instill laws and pass laws where they can arrest you for sharing misinformation. This is a reality that's coming. So down the track, when people have had enough and the nonsense and the bullshit is apparent, the platforms that they have may not be available to them anymore. And they might go, fuck, I wish I had said something a couple of years ago. Why was I scared then? Because now, my kids can't speak out. And the agenda is taking over. So it felt right for me at the time. It still feels right for me right now to continue to speak and share information. And, I shared something yesterday because about 2 years ago today, I was interviewed by Australia's 60 Minutes program. And I was interviewed by their head journalist or reporter or interviewer. And she asked me the question. She basically said, do you not believe that this is a pandemic? And I said, basically, time will tell. From everything that you guys are saying, you would come to the conclusion that's a pandemic. But if you look at where this originated from the Imperial College of London under, I think it was Neil Ferguson, I think his name was. He had done computer modelling on other viruses, mad cow disease, SARS, Ebola, and the list goes on. And each time that man had done his computer modelling, a few years down the track, it was proven to be completely wrong. Yet when coronavirus came out, they used the same person, the same institution, backed by Bill Gates, and for some reason the whole world decided to follow this computer modelling for this apparent virus without any journalist many respected journalists going, hey, hold on for a sec. What have they predicted in the past that has come true? Or have they been false with their information, with their computer modelling in the past? If they've been wrong in the past, then wouldn't it make sense that you put a big question mark over whether or not they're being honest or factual at the moment? Maybe we should just wait before we declare something a pandemic based off computer modelling. Mm-hmm. So, but I found that really interesting that the mainstream media of 60 Minutes, the head reporters, when I asked them the question, have you looked into the Imperial College of London where this whole fucking nonsense came from? And they're like, no, we haven't looked into it. Even though I'd sent them information prior to our interview saying you might want to look into this.
Well, I mean, that's that's one of the things that I've also considered a lot. Just so there's a few points. One is I really, really appreciate that you just stayed in your truth from the get-go all the way through. Like, that's really, it's inspiring for me. I mean, when it first started unfolding, I didn't really take it that seriously. I was like, this is just another thing that everyone panics about in the little past, because I never pay attention to that kind of stuff generally. And then I'm like, okay, now we're in a lockdown. This is intense. And then I started sharing, articles that seemed sensible to me, things like what you're talking about, like, hey, what about this thing or what about that thing? And I noticed it just causing so much polarity on my social media channels. And I actually stopped, because I was like, I just don't, polarizing and people just shouting at each other. No one's getting anywhere on that. And I stopped, but I kept feeling this desire to speak out, this desire to say something. And that's when I started writing these long form poems, which I had never done before. I've been a songwriter, a musician for many years, but I had a lot to say and I didn't know how to get it out. And so that's when the poem We Are Already Free came through. And that kind of, even what you just said, one of the things was around trying to let people know, if you don't stand up now and claim your sovereignty, there's going to come a point where it's too late. And there's a line in that poem where it talks about people becoming nothing but a resource, and like a broken horse that is saddled, bridled, etc., that could just be used, and that eventually it'll be too late, and you'll wake up and say, I wish I'd bucked sooner. Like, as a horse, I wish I'd thrown the shackles off sooner, because my children are the next course. And so exactly what you're talking about, that's what that poem was saying. And I just really appreciate your capacity to stay in your truth throughout and just hold that line, because it took me a while to find a way to speak my truth without being concerned so much about who was going to disagree, and also not trying to really convince anyone, but just saying, hey, this is my truth. And if you feel this, I'm with you, and we can let's stand up for that and hold that. And I think I know that for just witnessing what you share in your channel, and also witnessing as I spoke my truth more, how many people that served and how many people that helped. And then the other piece to what you're saying is why aren't people asking these questions? Why didn't those journalists read the stuff you sent them? Why weren't people, because, and I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's that thing I'm sure which you know about and you've spoken with people about, is the mass psychosis. And it's when someone has allowed themselves to be convinced that they are powerless and that the system that our society is running has their best interests at heart, and that it's actually all okay, and the government, the schools, they just want everything to be fine for us. And I think that most people within the system do want that, but for them to acknowledge even one little thing, for example, we could even use type 2 diabetes as an example, to just say, hey, it's curable. It's only a sign that your body is asking you to change the way you're living. That's all that it is. As are, I would say, all dis-ease. All dis-ease is the body saying, I am feeling out of ease and I'm giving you messages. Please listen so that we can come back into ease and we can feel healthful and vibrant again. But when someone's entire consciousness, their entire identity is invested in the way things currently are, for them to just acknowledge one tiny thing hey, maybe this modeling is a little off, or maybe it's weird that every media outlet in the world is only saying one story and anyone who says any other story is completely shut down and canceled. If they were to acknowledge any one of those tiny things, what it would actually mean is that they're having an entire identity restructuring, that they have to then restructure their entire identity of who they think they are in the world. And when I realized that, I think I heard Aubrey Marcus talking about it, and I was like, that's actually such a powerful realize. It gave me a lot more empathy for those who are so deeply entrenched in it. Like, I've had my 4 boosters. Why isn't it getting better? Like, just like, shit, I know you must be so tied up in that identity of like, I just want to trust the institutions. And then at the same time, and you are still a sovereign being. And you, at some point, unless you make a choice around things aren't making sense, I think I need to look at this differently, it's going to just get worse and worse. And you will end up one day realizing it's too late. And so I really appreciate hearing your reflections on that. And it does blow my mind that so few people have stepped up in the main arena. Although that brings me to, actually, I saw a post on your group around Novak Djokovic, and how I hope everyone's watched the Wimbledon by this point, but that he has won. And that's like astonishing. And I would just love to know, just hear some of your thoughts around him as a man who has really held his truth and has navigated the fullness of the weight of the world saying, you're a terrible person. How has that been? And just share a bit of your thoughts about that as it's just happened.
Yeah. I'll speak about Djokovic in a sec, but I do want to thank you for sharing your truth as well, because right for the first year of this narrative, one of the things I kept asking was, where are the artists? Where, like, now there's so much content to be able to be channeled through the medium of art, whether it be through song or voice, through poetry like yourself, or the memes, or documentaries, TV, just paintings, just expression from the artists. And I couldn't believe it, that instead of the traditional sort of anti-society or anti-type of authority figures in rock and roll and pop music that would used to stick the middle finger up. And even as a surfer, and I know you love the ocean as well, the surfers were always anti-authority when I was growing up. It was, the pot smoking, anti-establishment, dole bludging, living, drug dealing surfers.
Yeah.
So I was sort of sitting here waiting back, going, okay, well, the rock stars like the Rage Against the Machines, the Foo Fighters, or the Guns N' Roses, or whoever's the Eminems of the world that are happy to spread their voice, and the high-profile surfers and some of the motocross people, and the ones that you know have a voice and aren't scared to use it. I was like, they're going to come out soon. They're going to come out. The songs are going to start coming out. The protests with some of these big name people are going to come out. I waited for 6 months. I was like, fuck, no one's coming out, After a year, we heard a little bit from Eric Clapton and Van Morrison. I was like, fuck, is that it? That's it? Good on them for standing up. And I think Ian from the Stone Roses stood up, and maybe somebody else. But it was mind-blowing. That was the biggest sort of that was the strangest thing I found, was that when the vax came out, what we had in this country and other countries, we had the rock stars and the high-profile people that you would expect to be sort of there for the people and speaking their truth. All of a sudden, in Australia, for instance, we had pretty much all of the high-profile rock stars telling people to get vaccinated so that we can get live music back on the road. Mm-hmm. We had the Foo Fighters, I think, was the first band to say, and Pearl Jam, and other rock and roll bands saying you can't come unless you're vaccinated. Like, it just blew me away. And then people like yourself that I'd never heard of, you create a piece of art that became viral. It went around the world. And I was like, okay, I never saw this coming, but this makes so much sense now. JP Sears, the comedian, who I'd never really heard of prior to the pandemic, he elevated into you watched his transformation into this beacon of power, unafraid, unapologetic, very intelligent, how he could deliver his message in a way that it couldn't be censored.
Yeah.
And others like yourself and JP that came from left of field, basically, that became the new voices for 2020, 2021, 2022. And it makes so much sense now. And I've always said from that how this narrative changes, it's not from people like myself that you sort of expect to keep speaking out, but it'll happen from the left of field when nobody will expect it. Like what's happening with the Dutch farmers at the moment or the Canadian truckers. No one could have predicted Canadian truckers and Dutch farmers or the Sri Lankan population would be the bringers of, again, a new narrative. Like, who could have ever predicted these types of things happening? And this is why I'm loving the last couple of years, because you cannot actually predict where the ripple effect is going to come in from. You know, it's like, fuck, you couldn't script this. You couldn't write it. You couldn't even think about that this could actually happen. So what's going to happen in the coming years, I have no idea, but it probably won't be what you think it'll be that'll change the future of humanity. You know, this is what and same thing with the vaccines. You know, one of my thoughts is that the people that have believed in the pharmaceutical system, the medical system, the government, the people that have put all of their trust and belief into them, when they realize that they've been deceived, lied to, put their lives at risk and their children's lives at risk, you wait till those people get pissed off. Like, that will be such a ripple effect that, you know, the Djokovic's or the Pete Evans or the other people like that have stood up, you know, we won't even be able to hold a candle to what's coming, you know, because the force behind people that are really fucking pissed off, that have lost their loved ones because they've trusted in something, you know, that will be a force to be reckoned with. And I don't think anyone will be able to contain what that will be. And I believe that tidal wave or the tsunami of that isn't too far away, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because for that to happen, those people are going to have to go through a lot of pain and suffering through the choices that they've made. And I don't say that lightly, and I say it with all compassion and sincerity. But you know, there is a possibility that narrative will come through. So going back to Djokovic, you know, it's I've never met the man. I've watched him play tennis at the Australian Open, and he is like so many high level athletes. You know, they're masters of their craft. You know. I do believe that the idolization of celebrities for any, whether they're actors, whether they're musicians, whether they're sporting people, whether they're chefs, whether they're whoever they are, you know, I think that's one of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in at the moment. I've never been a huge sort of idolizer of celebrity, because once I entered that game and got to rub shoulders with many celebrities, and just so your audience knows, I hosted Australia's #1 TV show for 11 years. So I became a high-profile celebrity, and I don't like that word, but I'll use it anyway, in this country. And I got to, as I said, rub shoulders with a lot of them. And I learnt very quickly that, I don't think any of us should be idolized in any way, shape or form, except, looking at someone like Djokovic. Fuck, we can take our hat off and go, what a master of discipline to dedicate their life to being able to be so good at their chosen craft or their art, in this case, tennis. Now, I shared an interview that he did recently about taking the vaccine, or not taking the vaccine in his case, and the interviewer said, will you, basically you're risking your legacy, so to speak, or your ability to become the greatest tennis player of all time, which he currently is, I believe. But for him to potentially miss out on some of the Grand Slams because he won't be able to enter that country and compete, or that state and compete, because he hasn't taken the vaccine, like what happened this year in the Australian Open. What a farce that was. They let him into Australia, then basically locked him up and then sent him home without even having to play. And as I was watching that unfold, I thought, well, this will be interesting, like to see how dedicated he is to himself and his beliefs. And again, take my hat off to him, because he basically said, fuck it, I'm not taking that, because I want to protect my body. My body and my health for the rest of my life is way more important than the amount of trophies that I can continue to win, basically, is what he said. And I'll tell you what's really telling, and maybe it's a bit biased because I'm in Australia, but Djokovic won last night at Wimbledon, and I woke up today and I looked at the mainstream papers in Australia, and he was playing an Australian, Nick Kyrgios, I think his name is. And I looked at the headlines in the mainstream papers, and there was not one mention of Djokovic in the headline.
Wow.
Now, just let that sink in for a second there. I looked at one of the pages, it was news.com, one of the Murdoch outlets, and the Sydney Morning Herald, which is Fairfax. Basically, we've got two news outlets in the country. One is pretty much owned by Soros, and the other one is owned by Murdoch. Mm-hmm. And I looked at both of them. Couldn't find Djokovic's name, but the first 6 stories was about Nick Kyrgios. Yeah, and apologies if I've pronounced his name wrong. I haven't watched him play tennis, so I'm not familiar with him too much. But I just thought that was so interesting that the winner of Wimbledon, it was like the one that cannot be named, like Voldemort. They wouldn't put his fucking name in the mainstream papers after he won Wimbledon. They're scared to even promote him, because what does Djokovic stand for? Exactly what you're talking about. Sovereignty. Living his truth, regardless of the consequences. And I found that so beautiful to see today, because anybody that has, I believe everyone's intelligent in this world. So every intelligent person that would pick up and look at the papers today or go online, if I can see it, I'm sure other people can see it too, and find that really, really strange that his name isn't mentioned. So,
yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, that truth does always find a way. I heard a beautiful thing recently. Someone was saying, like, what was it? I can't remember the exact line, but it was basically, the truth is much easier because lies you have to remember. You have to keep. So I love what you're saying. And I actually watched a video, which I will share in the show notes if I can track it down again. But it was this woman who I think is a social like she's some kind of very educated, amazing older woman. So she really lived a life. Like I got the sense watching her that she's lived a full and deep life, and that she's holding herself very beautifully. And she says, she was talking about all the things, it was in the midst of all the unfoldings of the pandemic. And she's saying, I've been really thinking about how do we navigate these times? Like what does this all mean and what's happening? And she said, I had a realization around an image or a story that I can show. And she actually has a bowl in front of her. And in that bowl is sitting a pyramid of sugar cubes that she's piled up into a pyramid. And she says, she's like, I've always thought that it would be that we need to crumble from we need to get the ones off the top and take them down. And she said, but what I realized is that actually what's happening. And then she starts pouring water into this bowl. And as she's pouring the water, the sugar cubes at the bottom just start dissolving. And then the whole pyramid just starts to dissolve. And she's like, basically what's happening is that people all over the world are dissolving into the realization of our sovereignty, that we are all one, that we are the self experiencing itself, that we are divine, that we are all powerful. And as we all start to realize that, we don't have to topple the guys at the top. They'll just dissolve. It'll just eventually, in some weird and mysterious way, things change and transform. And I just loved that, because it's like what you're saying. It's so hard to maintain the story. Like now they can't even mention his name, he who shall not be named, as he's just one of he is literally the best tennis player in the world. To not mention him is completely insane. And it shows itself. And so as anyone seeing that,
basically you were talking about how the pyramid will fall, and that he who cannot be named, and
yes.
It's just it's playing out perfectly, I think, even though it's a little bumpy.
Yeah, it's very bumpy, and I think that I really, being a truth speaker, and also being willing to acknowledge that I'm not just because I'm speaking my truth doesn't mean my truth is right, and I'm fully available to get new information. And so in this case, the reason I speak out is because I have navigated and done enough work internally, as from my perspective you have, and the kind of people we associate with. There's an interesting thing about truth. And I was thinking a lot about this because there are so many narratives now of what is the truth. There's so many things saying, I'm the truth, you have to listen to me. And I thought of a very simple sort of truth barometer for myself. And it was simply this, that anything that points directly at me and at you and at the individual as the power, that anything that's trying to give the power to me, that is the truth. Anything that's saying you are it, you, Pete, are it, you, Nathan, are it, you, whoever is listening, you are it. You are powerful. You are sovereign. You have resources within yourself that are beyond imagination, that are just pure miraculous. Anything that's saying that, I'm in. That's truth to me. And anything that's like, no, give me the power. I will take care of you. I know what's best for you. That to me, I'm a little shady at that point.
Understandably so. I mean, I've learned my lessons on that over the years. Yeah. I think we all have to learn. It's a good lesson. It's a good humbling one. I remember when I was 19 and I became a vegan for 4 years, and I tried my very best to convince everybody to do the same.
Me too.
until I got really sick, and then I was like, oh, fuck. And then I changed my diet, and then but it was a very valuable lesson for me back then. I think a lot of late teenagers and early 20-year-old people do feel like they have all the answers. And it was a really good lesson for me to go through that sort of humiliation and learn some humility as well through that. Just because something works for you at the particular point in time doesn't mean that it's truthful for everybody. Maybe it's not truthful for you too, for long term. So I changed my intention after that. many years later, I was like, okay, what am I really passionate about? I was like, okay, I'm passionate about not short-term health solutions. I want long-term sustainable health, because my intention was to be around for as long as possible on this planet to not only co-create and manifest and turn my ideas into reality or dreams into reality, but also to sit back and, like I was saying before, sit back in awe and wonder and just watch this wonder unfold, and have that mystery unfold. We can create and manifest. There's no debate about that. Prizes, the things that you don't necessarily see coming, like I was talking about before, the Dutch farmers, fucking go you, the Canadian truckers. That's awesome. When that was happening, I was like, wow, who could have ever thought that this would happen? This is better than any TV show that I've ever watched. Like they're freezing their bank accounts now. They're locking them up for peaceful protesting, and they've got kids there playing and they're feeding them and the community's getting behind them. Yet the tyrannical government is getting really shitty at this. Like, wow. I go to bed, I go, oh, I wonder what tomorrow's going to bring. It's better than any Netflix show that I've ever watched, not that I don't mind watching a good movie or a good TV show. But I tell you, the last 2 years is it's funny. I met a neighbour a couple of hours ago on the property, and he goes, you shared some good stuff over the last 24 hours on Telegram. I'm like, there's just so much going on. I said, and all of it's just juicy. It's just, there's so many storylines intersecting each other. There's Bill Gates in the Netherlands. They're intersecting. There's Bill Gates and the farmland in North Carolina is intersecting. There's Bill Gates and the fake meat thing happening over here. There's Hunter Biden's laptop coming through here, and pedophilia and sex trafficking and drugs and election fraud and Trump, and Australia's just got a new prime minister, and he's just visited the Ukraine after Sean Penn was there and Ben Stiller was there and Richard Branson was there. And like, whoa, there's just all of this stuff going on, and it's just, and you can sort of see where it's heading. It's like everything's sort of coming out, coming up. Coming up to be seen, all the muck, all the dirt, all the shadow, all the stuff that we know happens, all the conflicts of interest, all the corruption that we know exists, but we don't really know the extent of it. We're like, okay, well, we still sort of live our good lives, so to speak. We pay our taxes. We got this. And the government's just printed off another $1 trillion for a war or whatever that makes no sense whatsoever. But at the same time, while all of that's happening, more and more of that is just coming to the surface. It's just coming to the surface for people that normally wouldn't take an interest in it. It's going to get to the point, I reckon, over the next 6 months to a year where it'll be like Alex in A Clockwork Orange, where the people will be strapped to their chairs with their eyes pinned open, looking at the screen. They won't be able to avoid hearing or seeing all the shit that we've allowed into our lives for so long that many of us have been open to for quite some time, whereas our family or our friends or our colleagues haven't really cared about it. But I believe it'll get to the point in the coming years where they'll be just like, holy fuck, I didn't know it was that bad. So, and people will be like, so I've been paying 30% of my salary or 40% or 50% or 60% of my salary to these people that have been lying to us? And what have they been using that money for? And why have they just raised the interest rates? And why has inflation hit 10% in the last year? None of this makes any sense. And all of a sudden, all of this is going to start to be unraveled and presented out for people to swallow. And it's going to be a difficult pill for a lot of people to swallow. But once they do digest it, it's it'll be an upgrade for their system, like you said at the start, and then it'll be that sugar pyramid you talked about. Organically things will change because people will be like, we need this to change. So that's what I think is going to happen. So talking about freedom and sovereignty, it's happening, and I think it's going to happen quite rapidly over the coming years. But again, it'll be bumpy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I love the way that there's like a two parts. There's one that's like, wow, what a story we're watching unfold. And it's exciting and interesting. The other part's like, wow, what a lot of pain and intensity and loss. And like, it's like both those pieces are happening at the same time. And then alongside that is the thing of, what are we focusing on? And you, to me, seem like someone who's really managing to balance that beautifully. You've got your retreats that you run, you're surfing, you're with your kids. Like, you seem to really prioritize, and the photos you share of the food and your meals, and then you're also sharing, like that one of the post about the avalanche of the chaos of all the storylines and just total chaos. And so how do you in your personal life, and I am using this as an invitation to anyone who listens to this, to find that balance of taking in stuff from the outside that's like on all different levels and storylines, and then being someone who's a generator, and how to generate that energy in what we actually take action on any given day. So how do you balance that out in your own life?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process for me. And sometimes I do think, I'm like, maybe I should be spending more time sharing more inspirational, aspirational parts of my life, teaching more about health and nutrition and sovereignty and freedom. But again, I'm following my intuition and my gut at the moment, and this feels more important than maybe it's not more important, but I spent a decade sharing information about how healthy eating, all the different tools for long-term sustainable health. So I immersed myself in that for so long through social media. We used to have close to 2 million followers before we were permanently deleted off Facebook and Instagram. So I feel like I've done that. I don't know, that might sound very strange, but for 10 years I went really hard. I released 20 cookbooks. I created 2 different documentaries, one on food and one on cannabis, created a 16-part cooking series called The Paleo Way, which taught people how to eat and live healthy, in my opinion. And so I feel like I've ticked that box. And it's interesting because only now is it coming, and my wife and I were discussing it yesterday. We had some people over at our retreat that are outdoor kitchen builders, and we want to build an outdoor kitchen with a wood-fired oven and put the smoker in there and a barbecue, so I can start, and my wife will start filming me doing cooking recipes again. I haven't felt like doing that for the last couple of years, but I know it's starting to percolate inside that I want to start sharing cooking recipes again, because I spent 30 years of my life sort of like Djokovic, becoming a master of tennis. I became very, very good at cooking professionally. So I'm feeling like that is coming back and calling to me to start doing that again. But to stay in balance, if you see my Telegram, as you mentioned, a lot of it is all the drama in the world and the nonsense that's going on in the circus, and I sometimes question, if I don't share any of that, life will still go on. Nothing will change for me. I could just share recipes for the rest of, if I decided to not share anything political or anything to do with climate change or anything to do with the Green New Deal or the World Economic Forum or Bill Gates or the corrupt politicians or the fake media. I could easily do that. I could turn it off and just share recipes and family photos. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like that's what I should be doing. Mm. And yeah, it's such an interesting thing. But to answer your question, I get my balance from cooking for our guests, running retreats, being with my wife, being with my children, going surfing, going for a ski like I did this week, learning new things when I can, and I live in the most beautiful part of Australia, in my opinion, or one of the most beautiful parts, with my wife, and we live in a rainforest with fresh flowing creek. So I get to dip my body into that creek every single day and connect to the earth here, and watch the sun come up and watch the sun go down and build a fire. So I have that balance. And one of the things that I'm very careful with, that I don't always get right, is wanting to be right. And it's an important one because I see it with some of the people that I follow and friends. They want to be right about things, like, I told you this was happening, or told you this was going to happen. And I told you years ago this is going to take place. Because I don't think it's a healthy place to fall into, I told you so, or I was right. Because, I'll put it in perspective, is my perspective is I've met people that, and I'll use this analogy, I've met people that have passed away, that have had cancer, that have shunned modern medicine. I'm not going to do chemotherapy. I'm not going to go that route. I'm just going to go natural. They're no longer with us. I met other people that have cancer that have chosen just to go the modern medical route, chemotherapy, radiation, shun holistic. Some of them are no longer with us as well. We understand that our beliefs are so powerful, Dr. Bruce Lipton, the biology of belief, he wrote a book about it, and the honeymoon effect, and many others. And I've had the great fortune of interviewing Dr. Bruce Lipton before. And our beliefs are so powerful. So I never want to be somebody that says, the vax will kill you, or the vax will save you, or eating paleo will be the thing that will cure all your diseases. Because if somebody doesn't want to live, nothing you can do is going to change the outcome for that person. And I often get, unfortunately, I get this question most weeks. I get emails from people. My mother, my brother, my son has got this illness. Generally it's cancer. They're like, what do you advise? I go, well, I can't give you medical advice. I said, I can tell you what I would do if I was diagnosed with something similar. I said, but that's what I would do. I said, it's individually we are a jigsaw puzzle, and ultimately we need to work out how our pieces fit together Nobody else can figure that out for us. So I know I'm sort of going off on a tangent here and maybe not making complete sense, but finding balance in what we do is ultimately the key for us to have a long-term sustainable life and to be a co-creator and manifester of what's playing out in the world. Yet at the same time, surrender to it as well, because, with close to 8 billion people on the planet all co-creating this reality, it's like... to think one person can change everything. What we can change is ourselves if we choose to. And then what do we really want to change about ourselves? So many people want to be like other people. It's like, fuck, really? Don't you want to just be like yourself? Because from my perception of to be truly free and to be truly sovereign is to be truly your authentic self. And all we need to do is look at nature to see how that works. It's called biodiversity. One of the agendas that is coming through is to homogenize humanity, is to make us all alike, to think alike, to speak alike. Whereas I would say that is the greatest threat to humanity, is the homogenization of the human species. If somebody asks me, what do I think is our greatest strength as a species, is our diversity, is our uniqueness, is our ability to be completely different from our neighbor and express ourselves in the most beautiful, wondrous, authentic way, where, when you're speaking to Nathan Maingard, that's Nathan Maingard. That's Nathan not trying to be fucking somebody else. When you're speaking to Peter, you're getting me 100%. I'm not trying to channel a spiritual guru here that I've read a book and trying to emulate. It's like, fuck that. Just be yourself, because we know the spiritual gurus are flawed, like we all are.
Well, so there's a beautiful thing there within that, and we're kind of coming towards the end. But I'm just reflecting on this, what you were saying around feeling your gut and what that asks for. So, like for me, with We Are Already Free, with the channel, I basically only share uplifting, sovereign, connected stuff. And at the same time, your channel, I think, is one of the only ones, if not the only one I currently follow right now on Telegram, because I found there were just too many other ones and like there was just too much going on. But I really appreciate your sharing because I know I've connected with you and I believe in your integrity and your authenticity. So it's a good way for me to get some of the drama and some of the mayhem, that because when you're sharing it, I'm like, well, this is some cool. And sometimes we'll go for a week without checking or for longer, but it's more about, it's because you're doing what's authentically you. And a friend of mine told me a story about this years ago. He actually runs Hemporium here in South Africa. He's really done huge work on hemp, on helping hemp to get legalized in South Africa before even cannabis was a story. And we were having a chat many years ago, and he said, he's like, how often people come to me and say, why aren't you trying to legalize cannabis? Like, why aren't you're not doing enough? And he's like, man, I've dedicated my life to hemp, and I'm getting hemp houses built and hemp grown and hemp clothing. And he's like, if you care that much about cannabis being legalized, you work on that. That's your thing then. And I think that's such a beautiful reminder of like, because you're doing that Pete Evans thing, I'm doing that Nathan Maingard thing. And so anyone listening, like, find your thing and do that thing. Like, that's what we need, is you to do your thing. That's what the world needs.
Yeah, and do it unafraid. Be unafraid when you expressing who you are. What's the worst that can happen? I said this recently. I had about a year ago. I was invited into a group of high profile sporting athletes that wanted to speak up against the what was going on with everything in the world. I was like, okay, well, you're sort of a year late, but better late than never. And but none of them really wanted to speak out individually. They wanted to form a group. And, I congratulate them for even getting to that point. And they used me as an example. I was on a Zoom call with them all. And they said, what's the worst that can happen? I said, I sort of lost my high-paying mainstream profile job. I lost pretty much every business that I was associated with. I've been ridiculed. I've been called a neo-Nazi and a racist. And whenever they talk about me in the media now, they say disgraced. I said the only other people I ever see that are called disgraced as the adjective to describe them are pedophiles in the media. So I said, what can you lose? Not too much, I said you can lose your income and you can lose your reputation that's out there in the mainstream world. I said, and there were some surfers on it. I said, but it's nothing like getting cleaned up by a 12-foot wave at Cloudbreak in Fiji and risking your life. I said to her, you all risk your life doing the sport that you love, and you're worried about what people will think of you, or you're concerned about losing money? Again, I said, if you don't stand up now, down the track, you may not be able to. You may not be able to. So it's so what I was saying was, don't be afraid to express yourself in whatever way it is. I've had all of that happen to me, and it's been a blessing. It has been a blessing to go through that, because it gave me the opportunity to see how I would behave and feel to have that much, materialistic wealth and income taken away, basically cut off in the space of 24 hours. Interesting to see what it's like to be perceived as somebody equally as despicable as a pedophile, and see how that resonates and feels as a father of beautiful children, and knowing that they have to live through that as well, that their father is known as disgraced in the mainstream media. It's given me a wonderful opportunity to see who my friends are and who has stood by me as a friend, or as a mate. And it's been interesting to see how that has been. It's been really interesting to see public's perception. And I'll just give this, I'll finish with this because it might give people a greater understanding of why I continue to do what I do. Is prior to COVID, when I was a high-profile celebrity, strangers would come up to me and ask me for my photo. Can I have a selfie with you? And it would be a common thing, like a very common thing. Whenever I was out in public, people would, oh, you're the chef, can I get a photo, blah, blah. I'd be like, yeah. Right. And I'd always say, first, I'd look them in the eye and say, what is your name? Put my hand out, nice to meet you. They weren't interested in that. The majority of the people that wanted a photo with me because I was famous were not interested in connecting with me on that level. It was fucking fascinating to live 10 years in that world, because I felt like a product. It wouldn't matter whether it was me or another famous person or another famous person. They just wanted a photo with somebody famous, right? I'm just trying to put this into context, because I got to live that experience. I was like, fuck, that's a really strange thing that people want a photo with somebody that they don't even really care about or want to connect with. When I stood up and spoke out, over the last 2 years, I've had very few people wanting to have a photo with me. Very few. But what I have had, that I never had prior to that, was strangers would come up to me now and they'd look at me in the eye and say, "Hey, Pete, I just want to shake your hand or give you a hug or give you a kiss. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being you." And I'm not saying this from an egotistical point of view, but what a difference experience that I've been blessed to live through and live by having such a polarizing or juxtaposed experience of being famous. One is a product of mainstream culture, popular culture. It really felt quite shallow. To the other side of the coin, which was being seen and being seen and being acknowledged for being a human being that was unafraid to express themselves as they felt free to do. So, I guess why I brought that up is because I said, don't be fearful of expressing yourself, because you never know what the outcome will be of that, except greater freedom. With expressing yourself comes greater freedom, greater opportunities, greater, I'll leave it at that.
Mate, you have me in tears over here. That when you just, as you expressed that, I just felt my heart just blossoming, that feeling of like the difference. That was such a beautiful story. I'm definitely going to tell that story more, because that is the difference of like, I just want to be seen with a famous person. That's it. To coming to that thing of like, thank you for being you. I mean, that just like, it's everything to me. So thank you so much for sharing that story. We do have a question that's come in as we come to the end from Fiona. And she says, curious as to what Pete is doing to become self-reliant. Are you planning, or have you already gone off grid? Is that important to you? So that's a question from Fiona.
Hey, Fiona, thank you so much for joining and for asking the question. We are in the process. We have been in the process for the last year and a half of becoming as self-sustainable as possible. Prior to this move out to our health retreat property, we lived on 25 acres and we had our own cattle and our own pigs and our own chickens and our own veggie garden. So we were on that path for the last 8 years, where we would kill our own cattle and our own pigs and eat them, and have our own water supply and power supply. So we're in the process of that, because we've had major floods here recently. It's sort of put a hurdle for us at this particular point in time to have livestock again, but we're working towards it. But we've got solar. The reason we moved to this property was to have our own water supply that could never be taken away. I do believe water is paramount for our future. Maybe not particularly now, but potentially in decades to come if things keep playing out. So we're just getting in early to make sure that water is just so powerful as well, especially spring water and running fresh water. Not only for drinking, but also for its medicinal values in bathing as well. So, but we're in the process of that. One thing that I have mentioned to people is that it's not a bad idea to be prepared for the future. I did a beautiful podcast last year with a fellow called Daniel Vitalis, and he's been a inspiration of mine for many years, and he has a very level-headed view of the world. And he's probably one of the most sustainable sort of guys that I know. And he said it wouldn't be a bad thing just to have 3 months backup food, water, and some sort of power supply for you. He's like, Armageddon's not coming or the apocalypse isn't coming and they're not going to shut everything down. But the systems that we rely on for everything at the moment are pretty fragile. They can be very fragile, as we've seen over the last 2 years. You know, things can get a little bumpy along the ride. So my advice to everyone is, like every species on the planet, the priorities is food, water, shelter, and obviously power for human beings. So if we can think about those things and perhaps not be fanatical about it, but just be smart and wise about our decisions in case some of the systems, you know, they keep talking about cyber attacks on certain institutions. They keep talking about food shortages that are coming. They keep talking about the financial collapse of the world. So when the mainstream media starts to talk about these things, generally there's some element of truth, perhaps not now, but down the track. So, that would be my recommendation, is just, see if you can have enough jarred food, tin food, backup food, perhaps backup power, whether it be a generator or solar or some sort of system. Have backup water, just in case, So, but my wife and I are dedicated to becoming as sovereign and off-grid as possible. And we're learning as we go. When the floods happened, we lost power here for a month and we were sort of trapped from escaping here for a good week and a half because our bridges were demolished. So that was a really good test for us. We managed, but we realised where we were a little bit weak in our infrastructure. So now we have amended some of those things, and hopefully next time something like that happens, then we will be better prepared. But in saying that, one thing that we came to realize was no matter how well prepared you are, you have to take into consideration how well prepared your community is and your neighbours are. And one of the things we quickly realized was they weren't. So there's food for thought there, because, the responsibility for yourself is important, and everybody's, one of the things I try to promote is everybody should take responsibility for their own actions and their own choices. And one of the things we came to realize when the floods happened was how unprepared so many of our community was. So that raises a big question, what happens in the future if supply chains go down? What happens if things get pretty bumpy along the way and nobody's prepared except for yourself? There becomes a interesting dilemma. So, okay, we've got to look after people. It's in our human nature to do that. But at the same time, if people haven't looked after their own well-being and thought about this, what happens? It's food for thought. I don't have the answer for that, because obviously you can't provide for the whole community. You just can't. So where do you sit? Do you have enough for your family and yourselves? Do you have enough for 2 or 3 families that are your corresponding neighbours? These are pretty important questions to be asking ourselves at this particular point in time, because it could turn pretty shitty pretty quickly, and then we're all sort of up shit creek if people aren't prepared, no matter how prepared you are, unless you lock yourself in a bunker for a few years. But, what type of existence is that? So, my advice would be, and my hope would be that every single person who can prepares and has a good couple of months backup supply of food and water and hopefully power, so that if shit does get real, we don't go into a panic, because panic is what creates fear, and fear leads to not very wise decisions generally.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Pete. That's given me food for thought. It's actually things I've been thinking about a lot as well, as around is resilience just me having my shit together, or is resilience doing my best to enable my community to also have their shit together, acknowledging that we are all sovereign and have to make our own choices. But it's a really beautiful question, and I think it's a good ending point is to as we step back into the world, and we consider, how do I take care of myself? And then once I am actually taken care of, once I am sovereign and resilient in my state, what effect do I have on the world around me? What is it that I choose to share, to create, to collaborate with? And yeah, just really appreciate again your time and your integrity, your honesty, your authenticity more than anything. And I would like to ask you just one more quick question, which is, I think you've covered it so much in this whole conversation, but it's a question I'd like to ask all my guests, is that in a sentence, what does the term "we are already free" bring up for you? What comes to mind when you hear "we are already free"?
Well, that's the ultimate truth, isn't it? We are. Mm-hmm. It's just our perception, or our state of mind, or our belief. I believe we have always been free and will always be free. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Although sometimes I fall back into into the thought that we're not sometimes. So, but that's what makes it fun, you know. You think you got it worked out? Yeah, you haven't got it all worked out. You think you got it? You don't. You do, you don't. But at the end of the day, we are free. You know, it's just a state of mind, and it's our belief. And it's the ultimate truth, you know. And my journey with psychedelics, and especially toad medicine, you know, there is no debating that statement.
Yeah, we
are eternal, free beings, and we're one. You know, deal with it.
Thank you so much to Pete Evans. That was the end of that episode, and I can't think of a better place to end on. It's been such a pleasure to be able to chat with this beautiful man and hear his story, and just how he has navigated such challenges with grace and retains his sense of humor, his sense of, well, at the end of the day, sovereignty, realizing that he is responsible and he gets to choose how he responds, able to respond. So yeah, thanks again, Pete. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to the next one. Thank you for listening to this episode of We Are Already Free. You can find the show notes for this and all episodes at podcast.wearealreadyfree.com. And I really look forward to sharing further with you. We've got our next podcast episode coming up in a week's time. It's every Thursday. They'll be coming out wherever you listen to podcasts. And the next one is with my dear friend Roman, phenomenal artivist, musician, lyricist, writes some of the most impactful, uplifting, inspiring, and hilarious songs I've ever heard. So I'm very excited to share that episode with you. Yeah, this feels like such a great gift that I get to share this with you and with the world. I hope that you're finding in it that which you need to remember that you are already free, the support, the connection, the guidance, whatever the reflection is that you have been looking for. I sincerely hope that you found it here today. And yeah, the request that I have for you at this time is to please go to my website, to podcast.wearealreadyfree.com, and there will be links there where you can go to leave reviews and to share and all the rest of it. So this is a profoundly impactful thing. I know it might not sound like much, but if you subscribe to this podcast and you leave a review, especially as it is a very new podcast, it gives it the chance to reach tens of thousands more people through the new and noteworthy category on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, etc. So it's like a small almost reflection or sign that little actions can make a really big difference. I think this podcast is something that we've all been needing. I certainly have been needing it because there's so many places out there on social media, on Telegram, on all these different platforms that are just, it seems so negative, so much of what's being shared and what's going on. And yes, it's important to know about what's happening out there. And it's also important to realize that what I pay attention to, I buy more of. Literally paying attention. What I spend time on, I purchase more of. That's why it's spending. That's spending time, paying attention. So my invitation and my intention with this podcast is to have the conversations with people who are themselves embodying and paying attention and spending time on building and growing a life that is beautiful, that is worth living right now. Like, why wait for that to happen in some distant future? You know, I'm here and I'm navigating it all with as much grace as I can as well. So yeah, I hope that you're finding yourself within this and finding the parts of yourself that maybe are needing a bit more attention, a bit more light, a bit more love. Those, like, what is it you dream of in the world? What would you like to create? What would you like to manifest? And give some more love to that, pay some more attention in that direction. So I'm also offering as a part of this podcast is that I'm an intuitive guide. It's part of what I do through breathwork, facilitation, through empowering songs, stories, poems, and through pro coaching, which has become more of an intuitive guiding, although I do have the certifications, etc. But really just supporting people like you on your hero's journey, just helping anyone who is in need right now, who's looking at manifesting a different way of being, transforming, and maybe struggling a bit with that, feeling isolated, overwhelmed, disconnected, just needing a little bit of guidance along the way. I'm here for that. So if you want to leave a voice note, again, go to the same website, podcast.wearealreadyfree.com, and you'll see a link somewhere there to leave a voice note. And if you're okay with it, you can leave a voice note and I will respond to it at the end of these podcast episodes. And I'm sure that whatever it is that you're feeling, whatever you're challenged by, whatever you're going through, if you are willing to be vulnerable and share that it will be of service to other people. One of the things I've learned from writing super vulnerable songs and poems for most of my life is that the more personal and the more specific I can be about my own journey, my own experience, the more it relates to everyone else's experience. Because although the actual details are unique, the overarching theme is universal. The themes of transformation, of challenge, of loss, of confusion, of overwhelm, of joy, of connection, of success, of failure, all those things, like everybody knows that, everyone goes through it. So by hearing other people's stories, it really can be super inspiring to realize, oh my gosh, I'm not as alone as I thought I was, or I'm not alone at all. There's so many others going through this. So again, I would love to serve you on your path. Please do check that out. So all the things that you need to do, or that I would love if you did anyway, not need, but if you feel called to, if you feel the value in this, if you want to help this to move forward, if you want to help us all feel, heal, and grow a beautiful world together, go to podcast.wearealreadyfree.com. And yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you there. Blessings on the journey, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Ciao for now.